The wind came across the flats like a living thing, scratching at fences, tugging at loose shutters, combing dust through boot prints until the town's trails faded back into nothing. It always sounded the same out on the ranch edge, Elias Crowder had decided. A steady whisper for the land itself, as if the prairie were counting breaths. Elias rode in from the North Road at mid-morning, when the sky had that sharp, bright clarity that made every distant post look closer than it was. He kept his hat low and his gaze steady, not because he expected trouble. He had long learned to expect it anywhere a man wanted to be comfortable, but because the country had a way of punishing careless eyes. Wolves traveled farther than they used to. Coyotes followed herds like thin shadows, and the men in town spoke in soft voices whenever they thought he might be listening. He had a contract in hand, a narrow piece of paper with official stamps and an imprint of ink that tried to look permanent. The words promised him a simple job: assess a ranch's productivity for an expected sale, then report back. It was the kind of errand a man might take if he'd grown tired of living by his own whims. But even before he reached the cut of the creek, he saw what the paperwork could not describe. The ranch sat in a pocket of green where water still held out longer than it did elsewhere. Cottonwoods bent over the bank, and a line of posts stood with wire sagging between them like tired ribs. Beyond that, the barns and stock pens had been repaired more times than the wood should have lasted. The main house, a two-room structure with a low porch, looked weathered rather than neglected, as if someone had loved it hard and then kept loving it through seasons that fought back. A woman stood near the gate, not waiting like a helpless thing, but watching like a sentry. Her posture was straight, her hands still as carved wood. Delphine Yazzie wore her shawl close against the wind, the red sash catching the light when she shifted her weight. She didn't call out at first. She only studied him with eyes that missed nothing. Elias slowed. He didn't lift his hand in greeting yet. He'd learned on past roads that a man's words were easy to misplace when fear and pride sat in the same place. Still, he had come close enough to smell the earth, fresh manure and mended hay, the faint tang of smoke from a stove working somewhere behind her. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the caution he felt inside. "Mornin'. Name's Elias Crowder." He tipped his hat a fraction, just enough to show he wasn't trying to hide behind it. "I was told I'd find the ranch owner here." Delphine's expression didn't soften right away. If anything, it grew a shade more wary at the word owner, as if the title itself might be another weapon. "They always tell a man that," she said. Her accent held the cadence of long speech, clipped and musical at once. "Who sent you?" Elias offered the paper, then paused. "The county office. An assessment." Delphine didn't reach for it. She looked past him, briefly toward the road behind where his horse had kicked up dust. "Assessment for what?" Elias felt the question in his chest, not because he didn't have the answer, but because he knew the truth was going to be uglier than any stamped letter. "For an expected sale," he admitted. The wind tugged at Delphine's shawl, and her breath made a faint cloud that showed how cool the morning still was. She stared at him as though trying to decide whether he was simply a tool or whether he was a man with a conscience. "You ridin' for them," she said, "or ridin' for yourself?" Elias could have lied. He could have claimed he didn't care who owned what, that he only measured fence lines and counted livestock. But the frontier did not reward the kind of lying that tried to wash its hands. Men who spoke dishonestly didn't last long enough to grow old. "I'm riding for myself," Elias answered. "I don't like being used, but I also don't like making enemies without knowing why." Delphine's mouth tightened. Then, slowly, she took a step closer to the gate. She lifted her chin, and he saw the fine beadwork at the edge of her sleeve catch the light. "You'll do best to understand," she said, "that this land is not a coin you can flip. It's my home. It's the only quiet I've been able to keep." Elias swallowed. He had expected hostility. He'd heard rumors in town, rumors that made the Apache Woman sound like either a myth or a threat. What he had not expected was the steadiness in her voice, the way she spoke of home as if it were a living thing with rights. "Then you won't sell," he said. Delphine's gaze flicked toward the house, toward the yard where wash line stakes stood like patient posts. No, she replied simply. They can ask until they're tired. I won't sign. Not for money that can't replace what's been held and tended. Not while men talk about taking as if taking's the same as justice. Elias felt a small, unwanted heat behind his ribs. He had no desire to get tangled in anyone's fight. Men got hurt when they tried to step into other people's lives without invitation. Yet he was already there, already in her yard, already taking in the proof that she had worked the ranch herself through storms and lean months. All right, he said more gently than he meant. I'll do what the paper says. I'll walk the place, I'll look at the stock, and I'll write my report plain. Delphine studied him another moment. Then she opened the gate, not with a flourish, but with the firm certainty of someone who meant to control her own terms. Come on, she said, but don't think your pen is stronger than my fists. I've had to learn which men will listen. Elias dismounted and tied the reins where she indicated. The soil underfoot was firm where boots had compressed it, and spring had left a smell of wet grass trapped in the cracks. As he walked beside her, he noticed the details that only someone close to the work would catch. A repaired boot strap tied near the porch step, a patch of cloth over the feed trough where the wood had cracked, a row of herbs growing where they would have been an afterthought in someone else's yard. Delphine did not lead him to the house first. She led him to the barn, to the stall doors, to the fence line. She pointed out where posts had been replaced, where a storm had blown through and she'd rebuilt before the next rain. Her explanations came as naturally as breathing, but Elias could still hear the strain under them. The ranch was maintained, yes, but it was maintained against pressure. Every repair carried a small battle. When Elias measured a gate hinge, Delphine watched his hands. You got calluses like a man who's rode more than he's sat, she said. Hard to keep from it, Elias replied. She nodded once. Hard to keep from hard things, too. Her gaze shifted to his paperwork still in his pocket. You say you write plain. Good. Because the county don't like plain. Plain makes it hard to lie. Elias didn't answer. He had learned to let women like Delphine talk without trying to patch their sentences. He let her words sit in the air and understood they were not just conversation, they were warning. After a while, Delphine took him to the back of the main house where a cellar entrance sat partly hidden by a rug hung to dry. She stooped and pulled aside boards, revealing a metal box with a lock worn dull. Elias looked at it as she unlatched the latch. I don't need you for this, she said, seeing his curiosity. But if you're going to write, you ought to know what's true and what's pretending. Inside the box lay folded papers, handwritten forms browned at the edges, official documents bound by string. Elias didn't reach for them. He could feel the weight of them without touching, the way secrets can press into your skin. Delphine withdrew one sheet with thick, brittle paper, the ink faded but legible. She held it just long enough for Elias to read enough to understand. The title. Not just a claim, not just a receipt for labor. A deed. His mouth went dry. This is, he began. Delphine snapped the box shut before he could finish. I inherited this, she said. I did not come begging. I did not come to be saved. I was here when the first men measured the land with their boots and called it empty. Elias felt the contradiction of town gossip colliding with the proof in his hands. In town, they spoke of her like she was a trespasser on her own life. What do they say instead? He asked. Delphine's eyes hardened. That I shouldn't own anything. That my people don't count the way the law wants. That I came too late. That my elders' promises weren't sworn right. That the ink didn't belong to them. Elias exhaled slowly. But the deed does. It does, Delphine confirmed, her voice lowered. And that's why they want me gone. Because if I'm right, then their taking is theft. And theft ain't a crime when the men in charge call it a favor. Elias could hear horses on the road then, hoofbeats still distant, the rhythm of an approach. Delphine tensed. She had not moved like a woman waiting for a lover's letter. She moved like someone preparing for a raid. They'll send someone sooner or later, she said. You're just earlier than they expected. Elias looked past her, shielding his eyes against the sun. A rider crested the hill and slowed, followed by another. Men in worn coats, hats pulled low, their posture too casual to be honest. He saw the glint of a badge, not on either of them yet, but close enough that the shape of authority felt inevitable. Elias turned toward Delphine, and for the first time he noticed how she had built defenses into her home without raising walls. The cellar boards were reinforced. The kitchen door had a latch that could be fastened from within. A rifle stood just inside a shadowed corner of the porch, the butt wrapped in oilcloth. He didn't comment on it. He didn't need to. The men stopped at the gate. The first one called out, voice loud enough to carry, "Marshal's orders! We're here about that ranch!" Delphine did not step back. She lifted her chin. "You're too late," she said. The man laughed, a rough sound that tried to make her bravery sound foolish. "Too late for what? Too late for selling? Too late for signing so the county don't—" "Don't!" Delphine cut in, sharper than the wind. Elias watched the men's hands. They didn't reach for guns yet, but they stood like men who believed the law made them safe. Elias had seen that kind of confidence before. It always cracked when it met a person who wasn't afraid. "What's your name?" Elias asked the first man. The man blinked, surprised by the question. "Kerr," he said. "Deputy Kerr." "And who told you to come?" Elias pressed. "You said Marshal. Which one?" Kerr hesitated. His eyes shifted, measuring Elias as though Elias were the suspicious one now. Then he jerked his thumb toward the second rider. "Wren. Marshal Thaddeus Wren." As the name landed, the atmosphere shifted. Elias saw Delphine's expression change, not into fear exactly, but into a kind of exhausted recognition, like she had met this danger before and had survived only by getting harder. Marshal Thaddeus Wren arrived a moment later, moving in a way that showed he believed himself entitled to every inch of ground he touched. He dismounted carefully, boots landing hard on the packed earth, then approached with a paper held in his gloved hand. His eyes swept over the porch, over Elias, and finally settled on Delphine. "Delphine Yazzie," he said. Elias felt the wrongness of hearing her name spoken by a man who did not live her days. Delphine's jaw tightened. "You didn't ride out here for greetings," she said. Wren's mouth barely moved. "I ride to enforce the law," he replied. Elias watched the marshal's gaze slide over Delphine's property as if it were already his. "Is the law to take her land?" Elias asked. Wren's eyes flicked to him. "The law is to restore order," he said. "Your assessment paperwork will reflect the proper process." Elias lifted his own paper slightly, not offering it but reminding the marshal it existed. "Proper process," he echoed. "Is that what you call it when you ignore a deed?" Kerr's face reddened. "The deed don't—" he started. Wren lifted a hand without looking at Kerr, stopping him mid-sentence. Then Wren addressed Elias directly. "You a lawyer now?" Elias didn't answer quickly. He realized in that moment that his quiet desire to be used less might have pulled him into the center of something he couldn't walk away from. If he spoke wrong, he'd become one more man who sided with authority. If he spoke right, he'd become a target. Delphine's hand moved, subtle, toward the door where the rifle lived, not grabbing it, just placing herself closer to the choice. Wren looked at her hand and smiled faintly. "Don't," he said. "Don't make this messy, Delphine. The county would be kinder if you cooperated." Kerr snorted. "County don't need trouble." Delphine's eyes stayed on Wren. "County don't need land," she said. "It needs a story where it can steal without being called thief." Elias felt his throat tighten. He had heard moral complexity in frontier talk before, heard men justify cruelty with phrases like necessary and unavoidable. But this was something different. Wren spoke as if justice were a tool he owned. Wren raised his paper and its edge caught the light. "The sale stands," he declared. "You'll come to town and sign." Delphine did not look away. "I won't," she said. Wren's smile faded. "Then you'll be removed." The words landed like a punch. Elias glanced around the yard, imagining her dragged from her home. Imagined the ranch falling silent. Imagined the feed stalls empty and the fence line rusting. He had come thinking he'd only watch a woman argue with men. Instead, he watched the frontier show its teeth. Elias stepped forward. "Marshal," he said carefully, "if there's a deed, if it's valid, then you're not just removing her. You're defying law, not enforcing it." Wren's eyes went cold. "The deed is under review," he replied. Under review. Elias had heard that phrase used to delay decisions until the weak gave up. Delphine's voice turned low. "You reviewed it already," she said. "You just don't like what it says." Wren's jaw tensed. "I like what keeps men from killing each other," he said. "But you've made your choices." Delphine's expression tightened again. "And you made yours," she returned. "You wrote out because you need me afraid enough to sign wrong." Wren held her gaze. Then he nodded toward Kerr. "Take stock of the property," he ordered. "Count what's here. We'll decide what can be seized and what can be sold." Kerr moved toward the barn, but his eyes betrayed him. He was eager, yes, but he was also uncertain, because Elias stood there with a pen in his pocket and a conscience that had just burned alive. Wren turned his attention back to Elias. "You'll report what we find," he said, "and you'll do it quickly." Elias met his eyes. He could feel every breath he took being measured by men who wanted him to comply. But he remembered Delphine's steadiness earlier, how she had talked about home like it mattered more than a stamp. "I'll report what I saw," Elias said. Wren's stare held. Then, slowly, Wren nodded once. The nod wasn't agreement. It was something colder, recognition that Elias might be a problem. "Fine," Wren said, "but while you're writing, you'll keep your feet on our side of the law." He mounted back up and Kerr followed. Wren lifted his paper like a threat already filed. As the men rode away, dust rose in their wake and drifted across Delphine's boots. For a moment, Elias thought her shoulders might sag, but they didn't. She watched the road long after the horse hoofbeats faded. "They're not done," Delphine said at last. "No," Elias agreed. Delphine let out a breath that sounded like the first honest breath she'd taken all morning. "I thought I wanted quiet," she admitted. "I inherited this place and told myself I'd live out my days without begging anyone for kindness. Then you came, and now there's another witness. Men don't like witnesses." Elias looked toward the barn. His mind ran through choices, options that all ended with danger. He couldn't unsee the way Wren had spoken. He couldn't unhear the way Delphine had defended her home. "I didn't come looking to help," he said truthfully. "I came to measure." Delphine's gaze shifted to him. "And you did," she replied. Elias swallowed. "But now I think I measured the wrong thing. I measured fence posts. I should have measured the cruelty in men." Delphine's face held no triumph, only tired honesty. "That's the trouble," she said. "You'll want to do more than measure once you see." That night, the ranch's fire burned low and steady, fed by wood Elias had helped stack. Delphine ate quietly, not because she was delicate, but because she didn't waste words. She watched Elias with the same patience she'd shown in daylight, like she was giving him time to decide whether he would become safe or dangerous. When the stars came out, Elias walked to the back of the house where the box had been. Delphine had left it locked, but she didn't stop him from standing near it. He looked at the cellar boards and thought about how a lawman had called removal order. "Wren's not alone," Elias said, more to the fire than to Delphine. "He's got men who'll help him push. If you try to resist too hard, they'll paint you as the threat." Delphine's voice came from behind him. "I know," she said. Elias turned. "Then why fight?" Delphine stepped closer, her shawl stirring like a dark wing. "Because selling won't change the story," she replied. "It just gives them another ranch to pretend they own. And if I bend once, they'll bend me again until I'm nothing but a rumor." Elias stared at her. He saw determination, yes, but he also saw grief lodged deep. grief for elders whose words had been dismissed, grief for the long labor of surviving, grief for the way the frontier demanded women be either helpless or expendable. "I can go to town," Elias offered. "I can talk to clerks. I can show them what I saw." Delphine's eyes narrowed. "And when Ren hears you're talking," she asked, "what will he do?" Elias didn't want to answer. He had already seen the shape of Ren's threat. He didn't want to picture an arrest. He didn't want to picture Delphine behind bars. Delphine reached out and her fingers brushed Elias's wrist. Light, warm, grounding. "You came from the North Road," she said quietly. "You got a reputation somewhere. Men see that. Ren won't just hurt me. He'll punish you for making him look weak." Elias looked at her hand, then at her face. "Then why are you telling me?" Delphine's expression softened by a fraction, not into surrender, but into respect. "Because I thought you were just a man with a paper," she admitted. "But you looked at me today like I wasn't a mistake." The fire crackled. Somewhere off in the dark, an owl called once and then stopped, as if it had heard something too painful to repeat. Elias felt his heart shift, not into romance yet, he wasn't that foolish, but into a new kind of awareness. Delphine was not a person to pity. She was a person to protect in the way a man protects his own soul, by standing where it mattered. "Tell me what you need," he said. Delphine pulled her hand away slowly. "I need you to decide," she replied. "If you decide to help me, you'll have to help me all the way. Not just with words, not just with sympathy." Elias nodded. "I'm deciding now," he said. Delphine studied him for a long moment. Then she turned away and went to the kitchen. Elias followed, and she took down a tin of dried peaches, a scrap of cloth, and a length of twine. She laid them on the table with a care that felt like ritual. "Tomorrow," she said, "we go to town, but not the way Ren expects." Elias frowned. "You said you wouldn't sign." "I won't," Delphine confirmed. "We'll go to prove what he pretends isn't true." She explained it in pieces, slow and deliberate. There was a clerk in the county office who had once helped Delphine's father file a document correctly, paperwork that Delphine had kept in the metal box for years. That clerk now had a weak hand and a failing memory, but he remembered who had come to him long ago. If the clerk could be found and made to swear, the deed would hold. Elias listened, learning the shape of her plan. It wasn't just stubbornness, it was strategy born of experience. But the next morning, before Elias could saddle his horse, a rider returned with a new message written in a hurry. It didn't come by invitation. Ren and Kerr were back by sunrise. Delphine watched from the porch as they approached, their presence like a storm cloud moving too fast. Elias stepped beside her with his hands visible, his body angled to shield her as best he could. Ren didn't waste time. "You're to come with us," he ordered. "Today." Delphine's lips pressed together. "Or what?" Ren's expression didn't change. "Or we come again with more men and less patience." Kerr shifted his stance, impatient, and Elias saw the muzzle shape of a pistol under Kerr's coat. It wasn't out yet, but it didn't need to be. Elias felt anger rise. The frontier's moral complexity often meant a man could justify violence as necessary. But the way Ren said patience told Elias this was not about order. This was about fear. Fear that Delphine's deed would become a mirror reflecting how authority stole. Elias stepped forward. "Marshal," he said, "if you arrest her without cause, you'll have no report from your own clerk. You'll have a mess that'll take years to unwind." Ren looked at Elias as if he could see the cowardice he expected in other men. "Do you think I care about years?" he asked. "I care about compliance." Delphine's gaze flicked to Elias. There was something there, wary hope maybe, or a test of whether his courage would survive the first taste of danger. "Then take me," Delphine said. She reached behind her and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. Elias recognized it by the way the fabric lay. Papers again, protected from damp, carried close. Ren blinked, briefly surprised. Delphine kept her voice steady. "But you'll take all the papers too," she added. "You can't pretend the deed's missing if I bring it. If you want order, then start with honesty." Ren's eyes narrowed. He didn't like surprises. He didn't like a woman who refused to be cornered. Kerr moved. Elias watched his hands and realized the deputy's hesitation was not about legality. It was about not wanting to be blamed if things went wrong. Wren took the cloth bundle from Delphine carefully, as if it might bite. He inspected the papers without opening them fully, then looked back at her. "You'll ride with the deputy," he ordered. Delphine's shoulders lifted a fraction. She didn't argue. She mounted with controlled grace, her shawl settling across her shoulders like dark water. Elias mounted his own horse and rode close, not at the deputy's side, but near enough to keep watch. For miles, the landscape spread wide, sagebrush and low hills, a scattering of distant fences and the glint of sun on water. The sky felt too open for the way men behaved. By midday, they reached town, a rough cluster of buildings that had grown around a mining boom and never truly learned refinement. Dust hung in the street like a permanent haze. Men leaned against doorframes, watching. Women moved with their heads down, not out of shame but out of caution. Wren's wagon rumbled ahead, and Elias followed with a tight grip on his reins. Every so often, Elias caught a glimpse of Delphine's face. Her eyes didn't flit toward the curious crowds as if she were searching for sympathy. She looked straight ahead, as if the only thing that mattered was reaching the right door. When they arrived at the courthouse, Wren stepped down and strode forward. Kerr grabbed the reins of Delphine's horse. Delphine didn't resist. She dismounted and held herself like a woman who had decided what fear meant and rejected it. Elias followed at a short distance. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, ink, and sweat. The clerk's office was cramped, lined with paper files that looked like they'd survived more than one fire. Wren spoke to an officer and demanded a hearing. Elias waited near the doorway, watching as Wren tried to control every moment. Then the twist arrived, not like a gunshot, but like the slow realization that the wrong man was lying. The clerk they found was not the one Elias had heard rumors about. This clerk was a younger man with quick eyes and a nervous habit of tapping his pencil. When Wren demanded the records connected to the deed, the younger clerk frowned. "I can find the file," he said, "but it may not match your citation." Wren's face hardened. "It will," he replied. The clerk hesitated. "Sir, the file shows a signed transfer and a validated deed, stamped—" Wren cut him off. "That stamp was fraudulent," he said. Delphine's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise but in comprehension. Elias understood then. Wren didn't just want the ranch. He wanted to erase the truth. The younger clerk swallowed. "Sir, I can't claim that without evidence." Wren leaned forward, voice low enough that only Elias could hear. "You want to keep your job." The clerk's face went pale. Elias stepped in. "Marshal," he said firmly, "you asked for plain process. If you're right, prove it." Wren's gaze flicked to Elias, and Elias could see a calculation. Wren had expected Elias to stay outside this part of the room. Elias had become suddenly a witness with a pen and a spine. Delphine spoke then, her voice carrying over the clerk's fear like a blade finding its edge. "The stamp wasn't fraudulent," she said. "The stamp was signed by a man who helped my people before the law decided we were convenient to forget." Wren's jaw tightened. "You're mistaken." Delphine looked at the younger clerk. "Find the elder clerk, the one with the weak hand. He kept the original record because he believed paper could be true even when men wanted it false." The younger clerk blinked. "The elder clerk, he's ill," he stammered. Elias's heart pounded. If the elder clerk was ill, the timing was cruel, and perfect for Wren's plan. Wren's eyes flashed. "No need," he said quickly. "We have enough." Elias stared at him. "You're rushing," Elias said. "You're afraid of one man with a weak hand." For a moment, the courthouse felt silent enough that Elias could hear dust settle. Wren's eyes narrowed. "Watch your tongue." Delphine's hand moved, just slightly, toward the edge of the table where her cloth bundle of papers sat. Elias saw the gesture and knew she was ready to open and show proof if given the chance. Then something shifted in the room, small but decisive. Marshal Thaddeus Wren, the man who had come like a wall, abruptly faltered. His expression changed not into fear but into conflict, as if he were remembering something he had tried to bury. He looked at Elias, and for the first time his certainty looked thin. "Elias Crowder," Wren said slowly, like he hadn't planned to say the name. "You don't know what you're asking for." Elias's brow furrowed. "I'm asking for the deed to be examined honestly," he replied. Wren's face tightened. "Honesty doesn't save people," he said. Delphine's eyes sharpened. "It does for some," she answered. Wren turned his gaze to Delphine. "And it doesn't for others," he said, and his voice carried a bitterness that made Elias realize the Marshal wasn't only a bully in a uniform. There was history in him. The clerk finally found the paperwork trail for where the elder clerk's records were kept. The search led them to a back room where an older ledger lay sealed and signed with a stamp older than Wren's authority. When the seal was broken and the ledger opened, inked lines appeared that matched Delphine's deed. Elias watched Wren's expression as the truth surfaced. The Marshal's face did not crumble into defeat. It hardened into something else, relief mixed with regret, as if he had been holding the weight of the lie too long. Delphine stood very still. "That's it," she said softly. Elias felt the air shift around her. The fight wasn't over, but the foundation of Wren's plan had split. Wren looked at Delphine as if seeing her for the first time, not as an enemy, but as a person whose rights had been denied by the same hands now trying to justify themselves. The surprise twist came fully then. Wren reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a different document than the one he'd used to demand removal. It was an internal order, a rough draft written weeks ago. The ink was blotched, as if he'd tried to make his own handwriting look like someone else's. Elias recognized the gravity in it even without reading. Wren had prepared to seize her ranch. But then he spoke a sentence that flipped the moral direction of the story. "I signed it," Wren said, voice rough. "And I shouldn't have." Delphine's eyes narrowed, not forgiving, not yet. "Why bring me papers you don't believe in?" she demanded. Wren swallowed. His eyes looked suddenly older. "Because I thought it would keep peace," he said. "Because I thought if I took your ranch quietly, the rest of the county would stop looking for another target." Elias understood with a chill. Wren had been using her to protect someone else's stability, perhaps even his own. The frontier's ugliness was not only theft, it was bargaining with conscience. Delphine's voice went low, dangerous. "Peace built on theft ain't peace." Wren's jaw clenched. "I know." He looked at Elias again. "But you're the one who will decide what happens next. Your report will either protect her or help bury the truth." Elias's stomach tightened. This was the final trap Wren had built, forcing Elias to become an accomplice through bureaucracy. Yet now, Elias also saw the Marshal's chance to undo harm. Delphine watched Elias too, as if she already knew what Elias would choose and was waiting to see if he would live up to it. Elias pulled out his assessment paper slowly. He looked at the lines he'd planned to write. Careful, neutral, the kind of neutrality that keeps a man safe by keeping him silent. Then he began to rewrite. He wrote Delphine's deed details as evidence of ownership. He wrote that the ranch was maintained and producing. He wrote that removal would be unlawful if the deed stood. When he finished, Wren leaned forward and read over his shoulder, his face tense. "This'll ruin me," Wren said quietly. Elias didn't look away. "Or it'll teach you you can ruin yourself trying to protect your conscience," he replied. Delphine let out a slow breath. It wasn't gratitude. It was exhaustion turning into something like clarity. Wren exhaled, then reached for his own pen. He signed an amended order rescinding the seizure request. The room went still again, this time with a kind of disbelief. Men outside the office could argue later about what the Marshal did, but the ink was proof. Delphine's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Her expression changed in a way Elias found startling. The fierceness did not fade, but it became less lonely. She looked like someone had taken a weight off her chest and placed it somewhere else. When they left the courthouse, the crowd murmured. Some men stared at Delphine as if she'd performed magic. Others stared at Ren with anger as if he'd betrayed authority. Ren didn't meet their eyes. He kept his gaze forward. As the sun dropped toward evening, Elias and Delphine returned to the ranch with the amended order folded safely into Delphine's cloth bundle. Elias felt the entire world pull tighter around him again, because returning to safety didn't mean danger stopped. It meant danger had learned Elias wasn't passive. At the porch, Delphine paused before entering her home. She looked at Elias, and the wary tension between them shifted, subtly but undeniably. "You could have walked away," she said. "You didn't have to keep standing in front of me." Elias felt heat rise again, the kind that wasn't only from campfire wood. "I know," he said. "I just didn't want to be the kind of man who watched the law eat someone and wrote it down like it was weather." Delphine's eyes softened. "Then what are you?" Elias hesitated. He had no polished answer. He had only the raw honesty of a man who had tried to be practical and failed. "I'm a cowboy who keeps thinking he wants a quiet life," he admitted. "And then a woman like you shows up and makes quiet impossible." Delphine let out a small, breathy laugh that didn't hide pain. "Quiet wasn't what I wanted either," she said. "I wanted to be left alone. There's a difference." Elias stepped closer. The yard smelled of sun-warmed timber and horse sweat. The air felt thick with evening insects and the distant creak of fence wire. "I can leave you alone," he offered, careful. "But I don't think I'm built for it. Not after I watched the Marshal's hands shake when the truth came out." Delphine tilted her head. "So you noticed him," she said. Elias nodded. "I noticed you too," he replied. "I noticed how you kept your home while everyone tried to decide it wasn't yours." Delphine's fingers curled around the edge of her shawl. She wasn't asking for a declaration. She was asking for proof that Elias could understand her strength without turning it into a romance cliché. Elias offered the only kind of proof he could give on this frontier: action. "Stay your stubborn self," he said, voice rough, "and let me be the man who rides when someone tries to take what isn't theirs." Delphine looked at him long and hard. Then, with a controlled gentleness, she touched his cheek with her fingertips. Just a light contact, testing whether his face would flinch. "I don't trust easily," she said. Elias leaned into the touch a fraction, careful not to crowd her. "I don't ask you to trust quickly," he replied. "I ask you to let me earn it the way you earned this ranch, day by day, choice by choice." Delphine's eyes glistened in the firelight as the porch lantern flickered. She didn't say yes outright. She didn't need to. The frontier demanded courage, not speeches. That night, Elias slept in the small adjoining room near the kitchen. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to turn her safety into entitlement. When Delphine moved past him to check the latch on the door, she paused and looked back. "You still here?" she asked. Elias shifted on the cot, the springs complaining softly. "I'm here," he said, "as long as you need." Delphine's mouth curved barely. "Then wake up early," she said. "Tomorrow we'll mend the fences again. They might have stopped today, but men like that don't learn. They only wait." Elias nodded. "I'll be up." In the quiet dark, Elias listened to the wind, no longer only counting breaths. He listened for danger the way a man listens for his own heart. Alert, hopeful, ready to decide again if the world tried to take Delphine away. And when dawn came, dusty gold over the cottonwoods, horses stamping softly, the ranch waking into work, Delphine stepped outside and began fixing what needed fixing. Elias walked to her side with tools in hand. Their partnership wasn't formed by a kiss or a courthouse promise. It was formed by the hard, beautiful labor of refusing to surrender to a lie. When men asked later who Elias was to Delphine, he didn't claim ownership. He didn't claim ownership of her land or her story. He only said, "She's the ranch's rightful keeper, and I'm the man who rides when she's threatened." Delphine heard him and, for once, didn't look away. She met Elias's eyes across the yard and let her shoulders relax into a peace she'd fought for. Some romances started with fate. This one started with danger, and then with a choice made under pressure. And in that choice, the frontier gave them something rare. A love that didn't erase the past, but built a future strong enough to stand on its own deeds.